Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 4:30 p.m. to 5 p.m. session at the 2016 Open Simulator Community Conference. As a reminder to our in-world and web audience, you can view the full conference schedule at conference.opensimulator.org and tweet your questions or comments to @OpenSimCC with the hashtag OSCC16. At this time, we are happy to introduce a terrific session called Oculus and Music Technology. Our speakers today are Karl Jahnke and Jeffrey Tackett. Karl will be speaking first. Karl Jahnke is an assistant professor of animation at the University of Southern Alabama. Dr. Jeffrey Tackett is a music professor at Tennessee State University. His academic experience is centered around the combination of music and technology learning in the classroom. Welcome all, and let's begin the session.
Hello, everybody. Actually, I'm Dr. Jeffrey Tackett. I'll be speaking first. I hope everybody can hear me just fine. If I'm not speaking loud enough, just start shouting in the chat there. Welcome, OpenSim community. It's a pleasure to speak with you today. Just by an overview of what I'm going to be talking about today, we're going to start off by just a quick overview of how we got to the Oculus Rift and how this study began. And then I'm going to turn it over to Karl to talk about the nuts and bolts, how the environment was built and how we got to that place. And then I will summarize a little bit and talk about what we learned from the study. So first, we must always start with shameless plugs. This is just a picture of me holding a cigar-shaped guitar. I'm sure that sounded very good. I can't remember. It was a long day. So anyway, that's my information. Here's Karl's information. We've already talked a little bit about us, and that's what our ugly mugs look like. So just so you can place a face to the avatar. Let's talk about a little bit how we got to where we were with the Oculus. By way of background, I was looking for a study to marry music and technology. I'm a music technologist by trade, and that's what I teach at the university. And I've been teaching this for about 10 years. But it's kind of an odd field, even though it's music technology. And if you were to visualize that Venn diagram, technology would be eating music. We don't have a lot of technological ways to look at this music technology. So I was trying to solve a problem. And the problem was all the software that's available to record with, like say in the audio recording world, requires some sort of virtual software look. And this is based on kind of the 1960s and 1970s sort of world. So when you're looking at the software and recording people for music or any sort of audio applications, it's a virtual mixer, it's a virtual recorder. However, the modern student doesn't really know what that means. So I often, for my classes, and I know other classes throughout the educational world, visits recording studios so they can see that application in the real world. I'm sure you all know what a recording studio looks like, and it's got a bunch of equipment, and these days, those studios are kind of turning into dinosaurs, but it's still, that's what the virtual reality is trying to recreate. So the students need to understand that so that they can understand how to record and what the process is. So that was my problem. And I spent some time in Second Life and was looking for a solution there. And it just quite wasn't there for me. So I decided that I needed a desktop solution. So Karl and I have been working for a while on various other projects. He's an animator, and we've done some animation together. I've done the sound, and he's the director and animator. And here's a shameless plug, sillydragon.com is where you can see that work. So sillydragon.com. And so I knew I had a good partner there in trying to visualize this virtual environment. So literally we met in an overnight restaurant and took pen to napkin and sort of drew out how we wanted to do this. So I'm going to turn the time over to Karl right now, and he's going to give you the nuts and bolts of how that kind of came together in that virtual environment. Go ahead, Karl.
Okay, well, I think we're stuck on maybe slide 3. We probably need to be on slide 6. But my name is Karl Jahnke. Yeah, and we had met in an overnight Steak and Shake, plug, and talking about how he wanted to approach this virtual working environment problem to his students. And so I came up with the idea, okay, well, we have a virtual space where we can pick up these objects, spin them, look at them, touch them in a virtual world and give them that kind of tactile feel. And so I just drew up this little idea that we're going to grab this box and we're going to put it on the table, and we're going to grab the other box and we're going to put it on the table. We're going to hook them up and wire them up, because that's what a lot of audio stuff does. And that's what Jeff was talking about, that emulation of the real studio and actually using real cables to wire all this stuff up appropriately. Slide 7. So what I looked to is I played the game Skyrim. And so what I wanted to do to emulate that picking up mechanic. So in Skyrim, if you hold down the button long enough, you can pick up all kinds of different things and place them in the world. So I wanted to slim down that mechanic because it's a little complicated in Skyrim and how it works. But we wanted to create a virtual studio where we could just pick up these objects very quickly, place them on the table, and wire them in the appropriate order. And if we can go to slide 8. So we created this virtual studio, and I modeled all this stuff in 3D Studio Max, creating all of these things from scratch. So there was nothing prefab about this. So we created all these things, and I kind of emulated Jeff's original studio that I had seen, because that's the only studio I had ever seen in my entire life, or a sound studio. So I wanted to emulate that look, but tone it down just to the barest essentials of the objects that we were going to use to wire this room up. So there you have a console table, and we're going to take those objects that are on the bookshelf, and we're going to place them in the proper place and simulate how all these objects are going to get linked up with the wires, so that a student would be able to approach this and learn from that tactile and playing the game kind of mechanic. And this is where Jeff was like, well, let's do this in the Oculus Rift. And I said, let's do that. So I'd never messed with the Oculus Rift before, but that's where we moved into the game engine of Unity and using the Oculus Rift's prefabricated character creation with that. So I created the stuff inside of 3D Studio Max. If we go to slide 9, that's kind of just to emulate the workspace of 3D Studio Max. Just really basic edible poly geometry. I really kept it low level geometry. I didn't really do any high level detail. I figured Jeff was going to use this on a pretty low end computer. That's what I thought he was going to do. So I wanted to actually, so that it would be playable, it would run fast, run efficiently. So it was pretty low level geometry. And we created it inside of Unity. I used Unity script or JavaScript for some people, as they're one and the same in a lot of ways, and created the tools to move the character around and whatnot to play the game. On a side note, one of the things I realized when we were implementing this design was that left eye, right eye separation, and trying to get field of view and field of vision for a player in the Oculus Rift and for it to work right. And so when it came to actually picking up the objects, I created a user interface that emulated how far the human body could actually reach. And it's just roughly that 2.5 feet in front of you. So we had a cursor, and instead of a flat 2-dimensional HUD, I actually had a 3-dimensional crosshair. And so when this crosshair would go over the objects would highlight green, and you would know that this is the object you were going to pick up. And so I found that actually one of the whole thing, that was probably the one of most exciting elements of using the Oculus Rift. And now I'm going to, I guess I'm turning it over to Jeff because he's going to talk about the study and the results of that study.
Thank you, Karl. Yeah, so once we had this built, and kind of another side note to this, we had discovered he'd built it for sort of a low-level computer. However, I went and got like the recommended Oculus Rift laptop, which was an Alienware. Not a shameless plug here, just that's what happened. Because I wanted to make sure the study was going to run correctly and we didn't have hardware issues as we ran the study. However, we immediately found out that given that everything, we were forced to go to Unity 5 from Unity 3, we were now in Windows 10. We found some conflicts with the driver with the Oculus. So we messed around with that a little bit and found that a previous build actually worked. We just happened across that one night. We were working and couldn't seem to get it to work, and Karl just thought, hey, let's try an old build, and sure enough, it clicked into place. So the pitfalls of working with something that's in the development phase, because we had the DK2, the developer's toolkit number 2 for Oculus, so things were not quite as solid as I hope they are now. So anyway, that's just something to know. So once the study began, we had students and various other people who were already familiar with music technology and how it worked. And because we didn't want to introduce them to music technology with this serious game, we kind of wanted to see if this created some sort of realism and helped them learn the process of putting these pieces together, those objects that Karl talked about building in 3D Max. So our initial response with the study, and I would say this was almost a 99.9% reaction, was excitement to put the head-mounted display on. That was, it's still new enough that not everybody has tried it, and those that have tried it like it and look at it as something of a challenge. So that was kind of neat to see. Everybody was excited to try it. Of course, for those of you who messed around with this, there is some issues with motion sickness, and we did have about 15% of the study participants did experience motion sickness, so we immediately removed the display and thanked them and sent them on their way. So there is still some issues with that. The way the Oculus works is the distance from the pupil to the lens is an average of what the common human distance is, and so it's an approximation. It's not exact, so it's not going to be right for every single person that's out there. So we ran the study, and one of the things we were looking for was realism, because the whole point and the problem with the initial study, initial problem that I was trying to solve here was recording studios. How do you get into a recording studio? Well, if you've had any experience with a recording studio, they're very expensive to book time at them, and they're not always geographically convenient. So I was trying to solve this problem that users could get into the studio and they could learn about it without actually having to be there. Thus, virtual worlds, that's part of in education, what you're trying to solve. So we did have a very high rate of realism in the study. Students rated it as feeling very real to a recording studio. Just certain cues that you have in these environments, like the glass between two windows. If you've ever been in a studio, that just seems to be one of those things that's always there. So we did feel like we accomplished that realism part that we're looking for, and students found it easy to navigate and to use. And of course, kind of another part of the study was how familiar were the users with. We had Xbox controller, and if they were gamers, they took right to it, no problems, didn't have to do hardly any explaining. People that were a little bit older, the older generations, my generation, a little bit of a struggle because they weren't used to gaming. So time-wise, the more the students were used to gaming, they just got right in and had no problem figuring it out. So we felt we had accomplished the goal that we set out to recreate this realistic recording studio. and um, get students to learn how this process, and by the way, this process is called signal flow. So in a recording studio situation, you have a microphone that eventually gets to a recorder. And so that from point A to point B, that's the signal flow, and certain objects have to go in a certain order, and thus the game that we recreated that was on that tabletop. So we felt like the learners were engaged. We're excited about the new technology, although it's not all that new. It's been around since 1969, but as far as commercialized use. Why did I choose the Oculus Rift? Well, I just felt like it's kind of like VHS versus beta right now. What's going to win? Well, we know in gaming there's a lot of winners. So I feel like with the Facebook backing of Oculus, it's going to be around for a while. There's a lot of development, and it may not be the uh, best device in town, but it could be maybe possibly the most popular device right now. So that's why I chose that. So I'm looking forward to obviously this is an audio based thing, music. So looking forward to incorporating more of a 360 sort of audio environment, and also there's new tactile devices coming out that will hook up, and that will be exciting, and probably the next step as we move along. So I'm going to go back a couple slides here just to show you kind of the devices we had. I was so busy talking and didn't pay attention. Yeah, so here is kind of a summation of the hardware and software that was used to come up with our study. So that's it. So I hope that's something that's useful for those of you that are interested in development. I'm looking forward to trying to, again, another field to look into is to get this into an open sim sort of situation. So that way this can kind of evolve into a distance learning um, solution as well, because we have worldwide learners in this field, and again, the geographic location of studios is not usually not convenient. As a matter of fact, it used to be not that long ago, if you wanted to study this field, you had to move to a city that was like a Los Angeles or New York or Nashville, that was ripe with the recording studios so you could visit them. Well, we're hoping now we can solve that solution. So anything else that I missed, Karl?
No, you can talk about the motion sickness that I actually incurred for the first 20 minutes of putting it on. But yeah, it's still there.
Oh, well, thank you, Karl and Jeffrey, for a terrific presentation. As a reminder to our audience, what's coming up on the conference schedule at conference opensimulator.org. Following this session, we will resume at 5 p.m. in this keynote region with a panel presentation entitled Enabling the Forgotten Avatars. Also, we encourage you to visit the OSCC16 Poster Expo in the OSCC Expo 3 region to find accompanying information on presentations and explore the Hypergrid tour resources in OSCC Expo 2 region, along with sponsor and crowdfunder booths located throughout all of the OSCC Expo regions. Thank you again to our speakers and the audience, and if you have a couple of questions, we can still take those.
Hey, I swapped